Thank you very much. This evening is about crossing boundaries. And I feel that boundaries get a bit of a bad press. So I'm here to root for boundaries. And what I mean by that, I have quite a bit to do with boundaries. I get up quite close and personal with boundaries. I live in a rural part of the country and I love hill walking. So I find myself confronted with all these boundaries that I need to cross nearly on a daily basis. And last summer, I decided that I would go out for a walk from my house on a 2-hour circuit. And it was not a route I'd done before. I didn't know it. I didn't know what I would come across. But I wanted to do it because I wanted to explore. So off I started. Beautiful summer's day. About 2/3 of the way around, I actually came across this large field, and there was a stile into the field, and I could see there in the centre of the field, I could see this large group of young cows. And I do a lot of walking, and I'm fine, it doesn't bother me, I will walk through. But today I thought, there's quite a few of them, and they're quite young. So what I did is I jumped over the stile into the field, and I thought I'd walk along the top end and sort of keep an eye on them, see where they're moving, and I would just skirt the edge of the field. So as I jumped down into the field, of course, all the heads go up. Spotted, new thing in the field. So I start to walk along the top edge of the field, keeping nice and close to the boundary, and the cows start to walk alongside. And as if I stop, they stop. If I move again, they move. And as they are doing so, they're coming gradually closer and closer. So I see ahead of me, on the other side of this top end of the field, I see another gate. And I go and sit on it, and I think, right, I'll just wait and see what happens. And so I sit perched up on the top of this gate, and all these 20, 30, 40 young cows come gathering in and gathering around me. And they snuffle up and they lick and they are very curious to what this thing is. And I think, surely they'll get bored. They will move on. 20 minutes later, I am still sitting there, face to face, with these cows looking at me. So I'm stuck. I am stuck on this boundary. And I'm stuck on this threshold. I had the privilege to work at Salisbury Cathedral here for 13 years. And in part of my job, I might have been out on the floor watching how the visitors were interacting with the building. And at times I would see that a group might come up to the threshold. And bearing in mind, the cathedral, I feel, has got at least 4 physical thresholds. People are now thinking, 1, 2, 3, 4, what are they? At least 4 physical thresholds. And I also think it's got a whole host of metaphorical thresholds for people to get over, to come in. And as part of this job, I would stand and watch sometimes, and sometimes, sadly, to my mind, a group might come up to one of the thresholds and look and turn away and not step over. They got stuck at the threshold. And that would make me sad because I would think we possibly, as a cathedral, might not have done enough. We as a cultural institution might not have done enough to encourage somebody across that threshold. But there may have been 100 reasons. It might have been the car park's run out, or it might have been that they've just got to go and have lunch, they're starving. Any reason, but I was sure that in some cases it would be about somebody just couldn't quite, for whatever reason, fear of what's inside, fear of the unknown, not enough information. These kind of things stop all of us from accessing not just buildings, but courses, learning, opportunities, all of these things can potentially stop us all. And it's up to institutions and gatekeepers to think how best can they encourage people to step across those thresholds. And thresholds, to my mind, always seem to get a bit of a bad press. It's always the threshold's fault that it seems to be this line that people need to step over. It's a barrier of some sort. And immediately people are trying to say, what's the solution? What's the solution to this problem? But actually, I think the thresholds, they actually serve a very important function. They are that moment when you are stepping from one thing to another, a potential existence to another existence. It might be, as we've heard about prisons this evening, stepping literally from the modern world into a very tight, controlled world. The cathedral is talked about as a liminal space where you are stepping into something different. That is the whole point of buildings like the cathedral. But it's the same for institutions like museums, for galleries, for theatres. I love, in a theatre, I love the foyer, because it's that moment when you are standing in there and you are anticipating what is to come, and you don't know, this is a new world. When you step into that auditorium to watch this play, you don't know where you are going. And isn't that exciting? So thresholds are really important. They're important moments for you to prepare yourself in order that something different will happen when you go across. In schools these days, it's quite the in thing that you might have for children, a reflective garden, a reflective space, to do with the mental health agenda, giving children time and space. And the ones that work most effectively are the ones that have a definite threshold, whereby the children have to go through a gate or run down a willow tunnel, and that it is therefore separate from the rest of the playground or the rest of the school. Because it is about that transition from one space to another, going through, across a boundary of some sort. And it is really important for us all to be thinking about how we get over ourselves over these boundaries and cross these thresholds. But also, if you're a particular gatekeeper in an institution, how do you help people get across those thresholds? And of course, in literature, thresholds are an incredibly common theme that comes up. 3 examples in children's literature. You've got the 9 3/4 platform, is it? King's Cross for Harry Potter, when he has to get onto the train. That's a threshold he has to cross. You've got the secret garden and the door that opens into this new world. And then you've got the most famous probably of all, the wardrobe. And you can feel the anticipation and the excitement in the way that the story is told, and the fur coats are drawn back and you step through into a world of white. Now, isn't that exciting? That going from one thing to another, a threshold, a boundary, is exciting. So at the cathedral, we tried different ways of working with the boundary, not doing away with it, because actually the boundaries make it what it is. It sets it as a place which is different from other places, different from our everyday lives. So you want those thresholds, you want those boundaries, but you want them managed so that people are able to go through them, so that they are porous boundaries. And so we would try various things. We would bring people out to meet people rather than expecting everybody to come in. We would bring pieces of sculpture, as you might see, exhibitions outside. We'd bring even light shows outside. all about trying to manage those thresholds and manage those boundaries. So it's about using what you have. Don't take away those moments, because they're incredibly important about encouraging you to make that transition from one thing here to another thing over here. So thresholds, I'm all for a threshold. And I was darned glad of this fence when I was facing up to my cows. So I was stuck on my threshold. I couldn't go forwards because the cows are there in front of me, and I couldn't go back the way I'd come because they were also that side. Behind me was the farm's own private gardens, so I was stuck. And this is when I started to think about thresholds and barriers as possibilities, as opportunities. I was so glad to see this. I think you've got this in your packs. This quote from Martin Heidegger. A boundary is not that at which something stops, but that from which something begins. And for me, it literally began a leap into the air, because I stood up on the gate and I tightrope walked to the corner and I launched myself off into the hedge, rolled off the other side. I was in a new world, a new field, and I could continue my walk. So thresholds, boundaries, they're not stopping, they are a beginning. Thank you.